The old coal miner. Nobody seems like they want to remember them. But being an old coal miner, there's as part of these mountains as the mountains itself. All up and down Appalachia, this place is full of coal and been mined for hundreds of years. And their story needs to be remembered. All the men worked these mines underground all their lives. And sad that many of them never come home. And it didn't matter what color you was, they all worked hard and they all looked the same under these ground. And the stories that they could tell of how they raised their families in these old mountains and how they had to live, a time gone by. Of all their families that they raised in these mountains. Now, all through these Appalachians, in these coal fields, these little coal museums here and there in these little towns with the coal fields, all up and down these mountains. And what better place to go see how these old miners used to work, how they used to live. Now this one here is in Bell County, Kentucky, Minnesboro, the old coal house. And it was built in 1926 out of pure coal. See all the coal. I'll share that with you a little bit later about the history about that. But outside this old place is a lot of old relics of our generations past, how they worked in these coal mines, what they used, what they worked with, and how they lived. Now here is what they call an old electric motor that run on a track in these mines. They got one outside on exhibit. And this is what they look like in the mine. They were the workhorses of the day when industrial electricity and stuff started coming in these mines. They hauled the coal out with it. But before that, they used nothing but horses, mules, whatever the scene would allow is what they used. They even used oxen in some places. According on the size of the seam that they was working, I've even heard reports of dogs, and here's a picture of some goats being used. And they would load these cars and these motors would pull them out. There was 300-volt trolley wire above their head. They had to watch for that. And this is what they look like. This is a low coal seam version. There's the deck where you operate it. There's the trolley pole. On the trolley where it runs off gets its power from as it rides down the track. Old history here. Thing of the past. There's the cars they pulled that hauled the coal out. And some of these old motors were big old things. Like I said, it's according to the seam that they was working, what size equipment they could use. And they pulled a lot of coal at one time, car after car out of here, a dozen cars at a time maybe. And here in the deck, I showed you control. There's a trolley pole that gets its power off of the trolley wire, which is about 300 volts DC, and goes into the motor on this controller. And there's a directional switch, forward and reverse. There's the speed controller. It had anywhere from 1 to 5 different speeds on it. How fast you wanted to go. And the most important thing was the wheel brake here. Here's the brake where you brake the wheels. Seems like an awful small on this motor, the wheel on it. But that's how you slowed it down and stopped it and locked it down. And there's a light on it. They usually had one on the front and one on the back. And they hauled a lot of coal. And the old coal cars they used, this is about what they look like. Different styles, some slanted, some straight up and down, some made out of wood. This is what they hauled their coal out with. And they had things on the side of these motors. The track was pretty slick. They had sanders on them. Where they'd work that lever here in the deck, it'd put sand on the track, give them more traction. Because that track, steel against steel, it's slick. And these things would run away with you on a hill if you wasn't careful. They were dangerous, with a big load on you. And the old cars here, they would get so heavy sometimes that they would put what they call skids under the wheels. Where the wheels wouldn't roll, they would scoot on the track. And that sand would create a friction to help slow them down, especially on a grain. They would get pretty run away with you real easy. And they'd back these things up to the face, keep the track up, and they would hand load these cars. They'd leave them a car or two, switch them out, haul them out. It was just a process. They'd hand load these cars all day long. Got paid really back in the old days by how much they loaded. If you didn't load no coal, you didn't make no money that week. But nowadays they don't do that. It's all conveyor system from the face. They load the coal up from the face to the belts, and it hauls it outside. So the motor's mostly used now just for supplies. And here's a bottom cutting machine of the old days, early generation. It's got wood around it here to protect the teeth on it, because they are pretty sharp that digs into the coal. That's just a guard around it. But this is what they look like. They sit right on the floor of the bottom of the mines, and they had shield wheels on the back here. You see cables where they put jacks against the top, and they would pull them into the coal, and they would cut across the bottom. This is what they look like. And the reason they cut the bottom of the coal, it made it easier to shoot than shooting on solid, they used to call it. And here you can see they're just working it. They usually had a helper, and they trained these young kids on them. They was hard work though back in them days. And after they get the coal cut across the bottom, they would drill whatever pattern they had. Here's an old breast auger. They'd drill their pattern of their hose with their dynamite and their powder. But before they had modern electricity, they'd usually use an old brace and bit-like system to drill these holes. That was hard breaking work, back break. And then they load these holes with the powder where they could set them off. And after they set it off and it settled down, they'd hand load it. But as the modern equipment started coming in with the cutting machine, they come in with what they called the loader. This is what a loader looked like. It come in and got the coal up instead of hand loading. But nowadays, it's called a continuous miner. This combined the cutting machine and the loader all in one. This is called a continuous miner. And this thing can haul and cut more coal than in 2 or 3 minutes more than any man could load on his best day by hand. Now, back in the early days, children worked in the mines a lot, as early as 10 years old. And a lot of them were immigrants. They didn't have land, farms. This is all they had to make a living, to support their family. So they went to work at an early age. And most of them worked around places like this in the mines, taking care of horses and ponies until their backs got strong enough. And they wore lights like this at first, 100 years ago. More or less a candle on their head, a coal oil lamp. And they used lamps like this as time went on. This is a generation before my time. These are carbide lights, all different types they used in these mines. And here's the different types of carbide light. And I've used them, but not in no mines. Hunting or something like that, from my uncles. Now here's how a carbide light works if you know nothing about them. It's got a carbide in the bottom of it, and they put a little water in there, or I've seen them spit in it. Anything that water mixes that carbide, it puts off a gas. It goes up and comes out there, and they'd hit that striker, and there'd be a flame come out there. But today they use these modern lights. This is what I use, a weak light we call them, a battery light with a cable and a battery. And they last 10 to 12 hours, but now they don't even use them. We use LED lights, and these are really handy. You ain't got that old cord hindering you in your head. And in these old mines, they didn't have roof bolts back in the day. They used timbers. And oh, if you're an old miner, you never forget that sound of an old timber popping. You'll never forget that. Seeing these old timbers break, seeing the mountains set down, bad top, it's something to remember. If you're in these coal mines, you'll never forget that sound, especially if you're on a pillar section, what we call robbing. That's a scary feeling. But here's what a rock fall is, more or less. Just a bad place in the top, no support, it just falls straight down. And you hope that you're not in the wrong place at the wrong time. I've had a lot of good friends die in these mines. This is a sad reality. But nowadays they don't rely on timbers. Timbers are more of a warning device. These here are basically now all roof bolts. Nobody goes out from under supported top. Big improvement. And if you live through all the accidents and dangers of all your career in these mines, this is a slow death. Black lung. Many a good miners ended up this way. Only if they could have used this. This is the only thing that saved me in all my years in these mines. I wore these dust masks all the time around the face, and it made a difference. And all these old things that they use, this is an aerometer. This is what to measure the flow of air with through the airways in the mines. And this up here, a flame safety lamp. This is how we used to check gas in the mines, methane. By holding it up in the top there where methane would gather, it would flame up, but it couldn't cause an explosion. And this is what basically I used in the mines in my time. But they don't use these no more. They use digital meters. They can tell you everything about the oxygen, the air, the content, everything. But this is the worst thing in a mine for a miner. I've never witnessed this, or I wouldn't be talking to you. Now, if you're able to survive the actual explosion, this is what you're going to be in. Nothing but smoke. A lot of men had to barricade themselves off, only not to be rescued in time. They run out of oxygen, black damp, the absence of oxygen. And here's some sad letters in Freighterville. Ellen, darling, goodbye for us both. Albert said the Lord has saved him. We are all praying for air to support us, but it's getting so bad without any air. Ellen, I want you to live right and come to heaven. Raise the children the best you can. Oh, how I wished I could be with you. Goodbye. Bury me and Albert in the same grave by little Eddie. Goodbye, Ellen. Goodbye, Lily. Goodbye, Jimmy. Goodbye, Horace. It's 25 minutes after 2. There are a few of us alive yet. Jake and Albert Oh God, for one more breath. Ellen, remember me as long as you live. Goodbye, darling. Now this happened all around America, in the coal mining coal fields, up and down the Appalachians, out west, up in Canada. This happened everywhere. Here's an event that happened in Bell County, Kentucky. It took them 3 years to retrieve the bodies when they tried to open the mines back up. Sad times. This was hard. Only if they'd had a W-65. This is a little rescuer that we wore on our sides it don't have oxygen, but it would filter out the smoke, the carbon dioxide. Carbon monoxide, it filtered out. But then they went to this, the SCSR, self-contained self-rescuer. This contains 1 hour of oxygen. So, if they had this, a lot of these men that had barricaded may have made it out. But even if they did have it, and they had 2 apiece, I'm still a firm believer they ain't solved this problem. So you can breathe, but where do you go? And you're a mile underground, low cold. You can't see your hand in front of your face. So that's still a bad situation. And whole families and communities were just wiped out in an instant in these mining camps, all up and down these Appalachians. Sad story. And to beat it all, they fought for their right to unionize. They had to fight for it. They wasn't going to give it to them. And they fought them back any way they could. A lot of good men lost their life trying to unionize. But they finally got it. Here's a wage agreement from 1934 that my grandfather had left for me. Of course, I never met him. He died of black lung way long time before I was born. But here's a wage agreement. What they made. Worked all their life in these mines, all up and down these mountains. Sad times, but I don't want them to be forgotten. Now back here at the coal house, where I just showed you these machinery, this thing was made out of 42 tons of coal in 1926. And they moved it to this spot where it's at now. It's on 20th Street, right beside the post office in Minnesboro, Kentucky. And I tried to visit the Bell County Museum here. They just didn't happen to be open this day that I was here. But it's a nice place and some nice people in there. All kinds of history. Maybe I'll try to interview and give another video. But yes, this is me. I spent most of my all my working career underground, one way or another. And that was it. If you stayed in these mountains, you had to make a living for your family. And I wasn't going out of it. So that was my career. So I want to thank you for watching. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.